We're tracking some massive breaking news in the missing persons case of Nancy Guthrie. Savannah Guthrie just dropped a bombshell about her sister Annie and Annie's husband Tommaso. Insiders say this could totally flip the entire Nancy Guthrie investigation upside down. When she spoke about it on camera, people noticed. Her distress didn't look fake or played up. This wasn't that controlled TV emotion you usually see. She looked completely rattled, and you could feel how real it was right through the screen. The kind of raw panic that doesn't just fade out when the cameras cut and the studio lights go dark. Viewers could instantly tell something heavy had already gone down long before she even sat in that anchor chair. Something followed her right into that room, weighing heavily on every single word she managed to speak. And according to case insiders, the details she spilled, the specific name she dropped, the relationship she brought up, the dark connections she exposed while fighting to keep it together, might have just pushed this missing persons case into brand new territory. As the true crime story unfolds, word is that Savannah Guthrie got a late-night phone call that completely changed the game. This definitely wasn't your normal chat or some scheduled conversation. Sources close to the case say it was the kind of sudden call that instantly set off alarm bells, both personally for Savannah and apparently for the federal agents already digging into the background of this case. Here's the thing to get why this is huge. You need to know how federal probes actually work off camera. Detectives aren't always tapping phones and listening to every single private chat. Instead, they watch the larger digital footprint around the suspects, tracking habits, metadata trails, synchronized devices, and the exact timing linking different accounts, and that invisible digital trail we leave every time we text. According to case reports, when this specific phone call happened, it lit up the radar inside that tracked digital web. Agents saw this as a massive red flag because sudden data spikes often mean suspects are feeling the heat, reacting to fresh clues, or terrified that their dirty secrets are finally bubbling to the surface. In high-stakes cases like this, a single call matters not just for what gets said, but for the shockwave it sends across devices, timelines, and habits that agents already spent months tracking down. And word on the street is, this late-night call sent out exactly that kind of shockwave. The big takeaway, according to experts tracking this mystery closely, is that somebody panicked and accidentally showed their hand way more than they ever meant to. A clue detectives thought was buried deep, suddenly stepped into the light the second that call went through. Savannah supposedly described her own headspace after that call in completely terrifying terms. One specific word just kept popping up when people talked about her reaction: panic. And if you ask the people who know this criminal case inside and out, that panic was way deeper than just being scared. By then, Savannah already knew enough about the growing evidence, the key players, and the secret files detectives were building to fully grasp just how massive this really was. We aren't talking about everyday stress, or the normal heat of chasing a tough news story. Word is, what Savannah went through after hanging up that phone was so much darker. It was just pure, unfiltered panic. The kind that hits you right in the gut when a crazy theory suddenly turns into cold, hard facts. That horrible moment when a bunch of random clues just snap together, forming an ugly picture you can never unsee no matter how hard you try. By the time her phone rang, Savannah had already spent weeks pulling at the digital and personal strings tied to Nancy Guthrie's vanishing. With how the facts of this mystery are stacking up, she knew the suspects and the secret evidence well enough to instantly realize what the voice on the other end of that line was actually trying to say. To get why Savannah's claims are hitting so incredibly hard, you have to look at exactly where police think Annie and Tomasso fit into the bigger puzzle of this entire crime. Based on what detectives are piecing together, Annie Guthrie and Tomasso weren't just background characters in Nancy's life. They were basically glued to her everyday routine. But here's the kicker: they were some of the very last people to see Nancy on January 31st, the absolute last night she was spotted alive. On paper, nothing about that night seemed weird at all. If you walked by, it just looked like your standard, boring family get-together. But true crime cases have a way of turning totally normal moments into huge red flags once you know how the story ends. If you believe Tomasso's story, he drove Nancy home, walked her right up to the front door, and watched her walk safely inside. That specific version of events became a core piece of the puzzle investigators started looking into. What really dialed up the suspicion in this case was the exact timing of critical tech events tied to Nancy's house. Detectives figured out the security camera, watching the front door went completely dark right around 1:47 in the morning. Then, exactly 41 minutes later, Nancy's pacemaker lost connection with its paired monitoring device. Federal agents and crime analysts tied to the investigation stopped calling those events a random coincidence a long time ago. Instead, based on chatter around the active investigation, authorities and online sleuths slowly built a theory where the people closest to Nancy played very specific, calculated roles. Nothing random, no spontaneous acts, just roles that point to structure, planning, and ice-cold coordination. Under this theory, Annie brought something to the table no outsider could ever fake: intimate familiarity. As the true crime narrative unfolded, it became clear Annie knew Nancy's routines on a deeply personal level. She knew her exact schedule, her habits, security codes, and daily rhythms like only someone living inside Nancy's world for years ever could. That kind of knowledge meant knowing exactly when Nancy was home, when she was completely alone, when the streets got quiet, and when the whole property was easy to predict and control. Tomasso, based on that exact same theory, took on a totally different job. Detectives locked onto what they thought was the operational side of things. We are talking communication patterns, shady coordination, digital cover-ups, and a massive electronic footprint. Federal experts spent months trying to piece back together. Two people, two completely different jobs, one missing woman, and according to federal analysts, a digital trail somebody worked incredibly hard to wipe right off the map. When Federal Cyber Unit investigators suspect messages tied to a serious crime were hidden on purpose, they never just start out by hunting down the missing text messages themselves. Seasoned pros know that hitting delete almost never wipes the data clean. They know texts can be recovered, call logs subpoenaed, and deleted files brought back from the dead using forensics. Because of that, agents usually start somewhere completely different. First, they look for the actual blueprint of the cover-up. Metadata becomes the holy grail. Not what the message said, but the ghost data wrapped around it. Timestamps proving when a phone woke up, sync patterns between gadgets, random location pings, network traces, cell tower logs, and the invisible footprints digital habits leave behind when the obvious records vanish. Based on leaks around this ongoing investigation, federal analysts zeroed right in on those hidden layers of digital activity. Even if the actual texts were wiped, detectives knew the leftover patterns still proved coordination, exact timing, and clear proof that devices and users were syncing up. The visible chat might be gone, but forensic analysts say the phantom of that conversation almost always survives inside server records, cell provider databases, and synced phone activity long after a suspect thinks their tracks are completely covered. When it comes to the Nancy Guthrie disappearance, FBI cyber analysts started rebuilding way more than just one phone call after a weird late-night tip completely flipped the direction of the whole case. Investigators locked onto the entire digital environment tied to that specific call, mapping out the much bigger web of activity around it. Federal forensic teams deployed high-end recovery software built to dig way beneath the visible apps on modern smartphones. We mean tools meant to pull back data fragments that normal people think are gone for good. Even after texts get trashed or phones get wiped, clues stick around as scattered metadata, broken timestamps, system sync logs, and buried digital artifacts that still point straight to real-world actions. Using encrypted chat apps is not a crime by itself. Millions of normal people rely on secure messaging every single day. But for the detectives working this case, the red flag was never just the encryption. It was the behavior wrapped around it. Who was talking, how often, exactly what time of night, and if the timing of those chats spiked right around the major events tied to Nancy vanishing. One piece of evidence they treated as solid gold was voice pattern analysis. During federal manhunts, audio forensics experts can break down vocal signatures, speech rhythm, basic acoustics, and unique quirks to match up recorded voices with actual real-life suspects. Based on leaks about this investigation, because that late-night phone call held details that cops considered a massive breakthrough, putting a name to the voice on that line became a huge priority for the FBI. Agents also looked really closely at hidden metadata, the invisible digital layer buried inside our texts and files that everyday users never even see. Metadata tracks timestamps, sync events, device activity, file history, and network connections. In major investigations, analysts treat this hidden data like pure gold, exactly because it was never meant for the public eye or spinning a story. It just records what happened and exactly when. In this case, word is that federal analysts completely rebuilt the timeline, piece by agonizing piece. using only those hidden tech records. And instead of finding random, isolated events you could just easily brush off, investigators reportedly spotted a huge, coordinated pattern. It looked like multiple people working together in total sync, while actively trying to hide their tracks. Then we get to what true crime followers call the red file. It is easily one of the most talked about and deeply disturbing rumors in the entire case. Among groups of independent researchers, journalists, and former cops tracking Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, the red file became a major symbol. It represented exactly what investigators were desperately trying to find before it vanished forever. Based on the chatter around the case, people think the red file is basically a secret stash, possibly a huge cache of documents, records, or encrypted files holding evidence that investigators considered absolutely vital. Not your typical evidence, just sitting openly inside standard forensic systems, but intel specifically hidden behind heavy protection. It was likely built to either survive a raid or self-destruct if things went sideways. Rumors tied to the investigation suggest this stash included deeply encrypted files, locked down behind serious security walls, and only accessible with very specific digital keys. The leading theory is that the contents were rigged on purpose. Without the exact right password, the data would just look like total gibberish or pure static. People also whispered about hidden surveillance archives, and not just normal home security footage, but intensely organized files, gathered and saved on purpose over a long period. Based on the unfolding narrative here, whoever built this archive was likely out there actively recording, watching, or tracking targets, all while keeping the whole operation completely off the radar. Investigators reportedly believed the red file held the ultimate connecting digital evidence, the exact kind of proof needed to tie texts, choices, movements, and key players into one giant, undeniable web. In huge federal cases, that kind of connective tissue is what turns a bunch of weird coincidences into an airtight, unified timeline for a jury. Observers say federal agents were in a dead sprint. They knew the suspects might wipe that data the second they realized the FBI was closing in and finally seeing the big picture. And looking at the timeline, a lot of folks think that late-night call Savannah Guthrie got was tied right back to that sudden spike in panic. The rumor was simple: someone out there knew the feds were getting way too close to striking gold. Someone finally reached out, and looking at the broader story unfolding here, whatever was said on that call likely confirmed the exact theories investigators had been quietly building for weeks. When Savannah Guthrie finally spoke on the record, people noticed she did not look reckless or crazy. Instead, she looked like she carried a heavy physical burden, like someone who had actually seen the hard evidence and knew exactly what it meant. By dropping the names Annie and Tommaso, she basically exposed the exact network the feds had been secretly building for over 100 days. And to the people watching her closely, that visible shaking mattered. Sure, some folks dismiss TV tears as just acting for the cameras, but true crime followers argue Savannah Guthrie's reaction hit totally different, mostly because of her professional journalism background. Savannah has spent years working inside brutal, high-pressure newsrooms. She has grilled powerful people, broken sensitive stories, and delivered awful news while keeping total, ice-cold professional composure. Anyone who knows her on camera will tell you shaking like that just is not normal for someone trained to stay totally cool under fire. Fans of the case think her reaction meant everything, not just because the story was sad, but because whatever she uncovered felt intensely real, so real it shattered her usual professional armor. Her breakdown honestly suggested she knew the facts she held pointed to something very real and insanely dark regarding Nancy Guthrie's missing person case. And a lot of viewers think what Savannah finally exposed was just the tip of the iceberg that detectives have been building for months. Based on the leading theories emerging around this entire case, those hidden encrypted texts between Annie and Tomasso fit perfectly into the idea that they divided up their criminal roles. If Annie gave them deep access into Nancy's daily life, while Tomasso handled the shady logistics and cover-ups, then any chats between them during that critical window become absolutely explosive. Detectives reportedly saw those messages as way more than just sketchy. On a personal level, they were the missing blueprint to exactly how this whole operation went down. Based on inside reports, once federal experts rebuilt that timeline from deleted scraps, metadata logs, and encrypted digital footprints, and matched up actions, they were supposedly trying to show planned awareness instead of just random coincidence. Two different people acting suspicious on their own can sometimes be written off. You can argue coincidences, But investigators were reportedly building a darker theory. They found matched digital actions happening at the exact timestamps linked to Nancy vanishing, including those key events around 1:47 a.m., pointing to something way more organized than just random chance. Looking at the official narrative around the Nancy Guthrie case, the chain of events linked to that camera outage at 1:47 a.m., the pacemaker failing around 2:28 a.m., and that chilling 14-hour silence, and those crucial minutes right before the final 911 call, supposedly form a pattern authorities no longer see as accidental. Law enforcement and analysts working the case reportedly think those events lined up way too perfectly in timing and execution to just be brushed off as coincidence. And based on chatter around the true crime investigation, that late-night call Savannah Guthrie got might have been the final puzzle piece that brought everything into focus. Detectives allegedly ran an audio forensic check on the caller's voice. They reportedly found traits matching a voice profile already well known in the case files. Sources close to the missing person probe suggest the big deal wasn't some unknown stranger making the call, but that the voice allegedly belonged to someone whose name kept popping up over and over again in the federal timeline. Tommaso, the guy who reportedly drove Nancy home on the last confirmed night she was seen alive. The man who claimed he walked her right to the door and watched her safely step inside. The exact same guy whose phone pings, texting habits, and overall digital footprint had supposedly become central to the federal forensic workday before Savannah ever answered that call. Observers noted that when Savannah later said his name out loud, her voice actually shook. The heavy emotion definitely didn't look like an act. A lot of folks tracking the mystery think she wasn't faking a shock. She was reacting emotionally to what felt like hard proof of something she already feared was true. You can easily see the difference between those two things. And for everyone watching closely, that distinction really mattered. One of the biggest concepts in this whole investigation is what cops reportedly call having inside knowledge. When victims get targeted right inside their own homes, inside knowledge means details you just can't get as a random stranger watching from down the street. It is intensely personal intel that only comes from long-term access, built trust, and being close. Under the working theory of the case, someone involved supposedly knew Nancy Guthrie's daily habits on a deeply personal level. Exactly when she was home, when she slept, when she was completely alone, and when her neighborhood would be dead quiet, letting someone move around totally unnoticed. Detectives reportedly think that level of awareness never comes from just casually watching. It comes from being fully wrapped up in a person's daily routine. Authorities also reportedly zeroed in on knowledge about the physical house. Who had keys, who knew the floor plan, who realized which doors had security cameras, and exactly what those lenses caught. Plus, who actually knew how the alarm systems tied to Nancy's habits and medical equipment worked. Case analysts claim this simply wasn't the kind of information some random outsider would realistically have on hand. The same goes for her phone habits. Detectives reportedly studied who Nancy talked with the most, what devices she used, how they linked up with the monitoring systems, and how someone could allegedly jam or disable them completely. From what we hear about the ongoing investigation, you only build that kind of deep familiarity through years of trust and access. Window of opportunity became another huge focus. Federal analysts allegedly tried to figure out if someone knew exactly when the block around Nancy's house was clear enough for a crime without interruptions, witnesses, or sparking instant suspicion. Detectives reportedly believe those perfect time slots would only jump out to someone who already knew Nancy's exact schedule. Based on the timeline, investigators have slowly pieced together the exact same people allegedly holding that deep inside knowledge are the ones whose names keep popping up across the digital and forensic evidence. Annie and Tomasso reportedly kept showing up in text timelines, metadata sweeps, and behavioral logs, plus other evidence detectives felt showed guilty awareness instead of genuine shock after Nancy went missing. Here is the thing: sources close to the case say investigators didn't just pick a suspect and work backward from there. Instead, authorities reportedly followed the hard evidence as it kept pointing back to the same people through multiple different channels: digital, financial, behavioral, and forensic. Federal probes into deep cybercrime, encrypted apps, metadata digging, DNA tracking, and voice matching rarely ever move in perfectly straight lines. Experts who handle these kinds of intense true crime investigations say they usually progress in tightening spirals. One recovered detail points detectives to the next. A rebuilt timeline exposes new hidden gaps needing more work. Every tiny digital fragment uncovers connected threads the investigators just couldn't see before. That relentless process reportedly continues full force in the Nancy Guthrie investigation. Word around the investigation points straight to the so-called red file. If it actually exists the way detectives think it does, it could be the biggest breakthrough this entire investigation has seen so far. Inside sources hint that this file might actually hold encrypted digital records, secret surveillance logs, or hard facts that could turn a circumstantial hunch into an absolute slam dunk in front of a jury. If agents can actually recover and verify the data they suspect is hiding inside, authorities think the leap from gut feeling to hard proof could close fast. Audio analysis from that late-night phone call is playing a huge role too. Detectives say forensic voice matching hits hard because juries just get it instantly. Nailing a suspect's voice to a missing person case during a crucial phone call is not just some dry technical data point. It is raw, human, and real. Rebuilding the digital metadata around Annie and Tommaso carries that exact same weight. Agents piece together the timeline from January 31st into February 1st, using wiped text fragments, sync logs, hidden traces, and phone activity records. Cyber experts on the case say this new timeline shows a level of teamwork that is almost impossible to just brush off or explain away. A suspect might deny talking directly, they might deny intent, but detectives know matching timestamps and synced phone records are incredibly tough to explain away when they line up perfectly with a missing person vanishing. True crime followers think federal agents are completely done chasing random outsiders or totally off-the-wall theories. Instead, the whole focus of the investigation is zeroing right in on specific suspects, exact text messages, and exact moments in time. Savannah Guthrie breaking down on air really mattered. People think she realized early on just how calculated the plot behind Nancy vanishing actually was. Case insiders make one thing totally clear. They do not see this as a random crime committed by some stranger. Detectives believe this took serious planning, teamwork, digital cover-ups, and the cold use of deep inside knowledge against a truly vulnerable victim. Officials suspect whoever masterminded this cover-up thought secure apps, wiped files, synced movements, and secret folders would easily beat a federal sweep. But FBI forensic experts kept pulling up fragments of the exact same digital evidence someone tried so desperately to destroy. Trashed texts almost never vanish for good. Metadata sticks around. Voice prints leave a mark. Phone syncing leaves a hidden trail. And detectives say that late-night call, dialed straight into a hot FBI surveillance zone, was nowhere near as private as the caller thought. When Savannah Guthrie went on television fighting back real tears, viewers felt she dragged parts of the secret police investigation right out into the open. From what insiders say, the search is absolutely done wandering through wild guesses or dead-end theories. The net is closing tight around one call, one voice, and two names Savannah could barely manage to speak out loud: Annie and Tomasso. Nancy Guthrie is still gone, but federal agents and cyber experts on the case are slowly putting her story back together, piece by piece, across crime labs, tech hubs, digital trace systems, and eyewitness accounts. Detectives believe the massive cover-up is finally falling apart,